It's more of a hobby than a profession, because by profession, most of my life from a career point of view, I've been in the IT field. I got a degree from Waterloo, University of Waterloo in computer science, and that kind of determined most of my career path, though I've taken detours. I started writing kind of more as a hobby, and that was from my early involvement in MUNO, the Ukrainian National Youth Federation. Back in the early 70s, I was the national president of the UNYF. And one of the kind of accomplishments, one of the things that we started was the English section in Новий Шлях, the Ukrainian paper Новий Шлях. We started, at that time, was a monthly section called New Perspectives, and I started writing a regular column in Новий Шлях in English. It was a bit of a revolutionary thing, and there was a lot of opposition at the time to having English content. I believe it was around 72, 73. I'd have to go back into the archives. But it was interesting because very shortly after we started a monthly English section, Homin Ukrainy, which was kind of our big competitor at the time from the Banderiuski side, they started an English section. I think it was only like 2 or 3 months after we started ours. And it was quite interesting. The editor of the Homin's English section was Andriy Bandera, whom I got to know fairly well. And it's kind of unfortunate that you know, he did not live very long because I think he would have been quite a progressive force within the Banderiuski organization within Liga Sum. He was a rather progressive type of person. But we had good relationships, and even though we were in a sense competitors, we were kind of the second generation that came out of that original Banderiuski-Melnyk split. So we, I guess, reflected a new future within the Canadian context of where those two organizations should go. Where they actually wound up going probably didn't evolve, I think, as well as it could have, but that's another subject of long discussion. So that's when I started. Eventually, I took a sabbatical from Ukrainian organizational life. I was quite involved throughout the 70s and primarily MUNO. I was national president, and I stayed with MUNO for quite a while. I was also on the board of directors of the UNO organization. I guess I had an interesting relationship because I was the token young person on the UNO board, a bit of a rebel, at least from their perspective. So we had some interesting discussions on the board. Eventually, I guess we parted ways, and for I don't know, I guess almost 20 years, I was not very involved at all within the UNO organization. I went off and started a family, and that, my career was taking off, so I was focusing more on that than anything else. And it was only in the early 90s when there was a kind of change in leadership in the UNO organization, because for probably 30 years it was basically the same clique, the same group of people, the Plawiuk, Romakh, Mytsyk, Bilak, etc., that kind of ran the organization for a long time. And in the 90s, we saw a newer generation of people come into the leadership of the organization. It also changed some of their priorities and perspectives on the Ukrainian community that I guess was a little more in line with what I was comfortable with. And they invited me back into the organization once again, which I did, and kind of one of the first tasks that they gave to me, or that I was particularly interested in, was Новий Шлях. Новий Шлях in the 90s was suffering financially, readership-wise, declining. It was an old paper. I guess you could say in a way it was tired. It was had not at all, I guess, changed and adapted to either the younger generation's interests or even to the technology. It was still, if you looked at the paper in the mid-90s, it was almost the same as what it had been in the 60s and 70s. So they were actually thinking at that time of closing the paper because it was, financially creating a lot of red ink. So I got a group of like-minded younger people, I guess my generation. I still like to think of myself as young. And we mounted a kind of rejuvenation program to bring the paper kicking and screaming into the 20th century. which we did. We got a good friend of mine that's a professional graphics design artist to redesign the look and feel. We brought in color. We broadened the content of the paper to include more, less politics, though politics is always important, but more cultural, social, sports, humor, you name it, to kind of make it a real newspaper, not just a political kind of mouthpiece of the organization. And in that, and of course, the other thing is we made a good chunk of the content English, because from the time that I left back in the 70s until the 90s, it reverted again to being 100% Ukrainian. So starting in the very late 90s, year 2000 or so, it became what we now see as Новий Шлях, much more broad-based paper in terms of content and technology and viewpoints and also English language. And that kind of stabilized the financial situation because it once again turned into the black. The decline in readership was stopped and we actually started growing again. And basically gave it a new life, and it's been going fairly well for the last 15 years. It's facing, it's always ongoing challenges and attracting new readerships, and there's always issues. But by and large, I guess I can look back as that being one of my major accomplishments over the past couple of decades. We gave new life to Новий Шлях. And in the process of rejuvenating it, I also started writing a weekly column. So I've been writing this weekly column called Here and There in Новий Шлях for the past 15 years. And it's called Here and There because part of the time I was writing this, I was living and working in Ukraine. So I was presenting, I guess, my views on Ukrainian themes and topics, both from the perspective of being here in Canada and also being there in Ukraine. And I guess over the course of those years, I've developed a fairly loyal readership. That kind of stimulates me and motivates me to keep on doing, because it's strictly, as you know, within the Ukrainian organization, it's a labor of love. You don't get paid for it. Yeah. It's добровільно, на громадських засадах. So it's something I enjoy doing. It's, everybody likes to be creative. I sit down every Sunday morning and, okay, what am I going to write today? And I, as you know, cover a wide variety of ground. Politics, life of Ukrainians in Canada, organizational life in Canada, culture, history, language, humor. I've developed this kind of avatar called Hrits, my cousin Hrits from Pikami, that I often use to, poke some fun, do a little bit of satire. And I think that's something we need more of in the Ukrainian community, a little more humor to kind of lighten up the often all too serious tones. Yeah. So we got to have a sense of humor, I think. And unfortunately, I guess in Ukrainian literature and journalism in the diaspora, there's far too few people that have, engaged in satire and humor. And I think we need more of that kind of stuff. And it changes with times. Like for the 2-3 years that I was living and working in Ukraine, I took the opportunity to, educate the people here in Canada that Ukraine and Ukrainian people, Ukrainian culture, Ukrainian history is more than just what they learned here in the Ridna shkola, which I think has created a distorted vision of Ukraine and its people for most of the people that have grown up in Canada and never visited Ukraine. So for 2 or 3 years, my columns were heavily focused on, the things that I discovered while living in Ukraine. For the last year and a half, as you know, most of my columns have been about the evolving situation, the crisis, the fighting, the conflict with Russia. And it's almost difficult for me to write because I don't, it's depressing in a way. It's frustrating, it's angry, it stirs up all kinds of emotions to the point where it's a challenge and it's an effort to write about it. Because I'd rather be writing about, happier things. I'd rather be writing on educational themes. I'd rather be writing on, things that, look forward to the future, that, presenting my views on how Ukrainian society and culture and stuff should be evolving here in Canada. But there's so much happening there that's of importance and of interest that I'm almost forced to write about what's happening in Ukraine. But it's a difficult process because, it's necessary, but it's not necessarily enjoyable.